Hello, listeners, and welcome to another episode of Financial Autonomy for Women, the podcast. I'm your host, Maureen Paley. I'm a coach. I work exclusively with self-identified women, non-binary folks, and anyone that has received the gendered conditioning typically given to those assigned the female sex at birth. I'm so excited for today's episode. We have a very special guest. The title for today's episode is Money Mindfulness: How Daily Mindfulness Can Help You Reduce Financial Stress and Increase Your Well-Being, with Jessica Baier. And hey, reduce financial stress and increase your well-being, sign me up. I think we can all agree that this is going to be a good one. So let me tell you a little bit about our guest, Jessica Baier. Jess is the founder and CEO of Habit Money, a financial wellness platform that helps people develop healthy financial habits and finally achieve their goals. Oh, I hear that. Prior to Habit Money, Jess was an executive at Try Now and a strategy leader at Stitch Fix, and is also an ex-Deloitte consultant. She graduated with her MBA from Stanford and has a degree in economics from Macalester College. Originally from Montana, she now calls San Francisco home. Jess Baier, welcome to the podcast.
I'm so happy to be here. Thank you for having me, Maureen. I've honestly been looking forward to this conversation all week.
Yay. Okay. Well, I have too. So I'm so excited that we're here and we're doing it. There is so much good things to talk about in this episode. I mean, just the title alone, Money Mindfulness. So I want to dive in there. Let's start with, tell us about your background and how your background and your experiences, I think probably both professional and personal, brought you to your mission of bringing mindfulness and money management together. How did you get to this focus?
I love this question and what you said about the professional and personal kind of
Mm-hmm.
weaving together are, exactly right. Because you gave an outline of my professional background just now.
Mm-hmm.
And if you looked at it, you would not say Jess was destined to be a financial app founder. I also did not think I was destined to be a financial app founder. This was a
Mm-hmm.
very sort of organic discovery. So to kind of rewind to when I was growing up. So I grew up in a really small town in Montana. We're talking about like a graduating class of 42 people,
Wow.
same, kids from K through 12. So really, really insular and small. And my parents didn't grow like I didn't grow up with a ton of money. My parents didn't make that much. I'm the person who, when they filled out their FAFSA for college, they said, hey, you can get a waiver for admissions because your parents don't make enough money. And I'm really lucky. I wasn't aware that we didn't have much because relative to my peers, I felt great. But it just shows that we didn't talk about money because we weren't in that sort of environment. We didn't talk about 401ks. We didn't talk about investing. We didn't talk about creating even emergency funds. That wasn't something that I talked about with my parents. And so much of what we learn about money comes from the people around us. So fast forward to when I'm 22, I'm in my first job out of college. I'm making 3 times what my parents made in my first job. And all of a sudden I'm having to start make these decisions. And I feel stupid because I don't know how. I am overwhelmed because I have to make all of these choices. How much do I decide to pay on my student loans? What is like the appropriate price to pay for an apartment? How much can I afford?
Mm-hmm.
And so I just do what a lot of people do. I wing it. I, toggle the things, make the choices, move on because no one likes feeling stupid. So the best thing to do is to just avoid thinking about it. And that's kind of how I got by in my 20s until I got to business school and I graduated with 200 grand in debt while a lot of people had managed to save or manage their money better so they could pay for it. And then a year ago, my partner and I were sitting down to have the money talk. We were starting to talk about getting married and having, when you move in together, all of a sudden your finances start to merge. And it was a really hard conversation for both of us. And when we sort of got out of the conversation, we were talking about why it was so hard because we felt like we're really well educated. We feel like we're really well resourced. And so we looked around and said, well, how does everybody else do it? And so I started talking to people, and this consistent theme kept coming up that just reminded me of my background, where a lot of people said, I know I'm not stupid. I know how to manage my money. Like I know rationally what I'm supposed to do, but there's something that's keeping me from doing it. And a lot of people had a similar story to mine. You know, you didn't have to necessarily grow up with humble means, but there was some sort of blocker that was keeping other people like me from being able to turn the aspiration of what we knew we should do into action and actually doing it. And to be quite honest, a lot of these people I talked to were women. And that was a problem in the world that pissed me off.
Mm-hmm.
And because it was a problem that pissed me off, it was just a thread
Mm-hmm.
that I kept pulling at. And so I wanted to solve it. And fast forward a year and a half later, and here we are.
Here we are. Oh my gosh, you brought up so many great things. I think, a lot of what I heard was that, you talked about your family of origin, and we really do adopt our money story from those influences. And even if there wasn't like any words to write a money story as a kid, right? Because your family didn't talk about it, it's like, well, that's your money story. Is that we just didn't talk about it, and things like wealth building weren't expressed, pursued, sounds like, and you become an adult, you have this education, you have a new income, and a lot of what you pointed out was like, the big life milestones, your first job as an adult, you're in a relationship and probably cohabitating and so on, or committed and on that pathway. And when I've taught financial capabilities classes in the past, I remind people you can bet on every life milestone that you can list. Think about it: getting a job, buying a house, getting married, having a kid, so on and so forth. There will be a financial event. And what you're bringing up is that, not just an event, but discussions are needed and learning is needed at these milestone points. And you're seeing, it sounds like you saw the difference between, well, here I'm talking to some really smart people, some really smart women, and they know what to do. And there's something about like the actual doing it that needs to be better supported. So tell us more about that after you kind of crack that nut open.
Yeah. And I think the point about it, seeing a lot of it in women, I want
Mm-hmm.
to say that I do see this in men too. But you said in your intro, a lot of people who have gone through the female conditioning.
Oh,
And
yes.
I think that's really key here
Mm-hmm.
because a lot of this conditioning, whether it is intentional or subconscious, is different in how we treat women. So,
Mm-hmm.
the example my mom always uses is when her parents were creating saving funds for their children. For the boys, it was to buy property. For the girls, it was to pay for their wedding.
Mm-hmm.
No one said to them they shouldn't manage money, but that sends a message.
It
And it's
absolutely
not
does.
necessarily poorly intended, but
Mm-hmm.
that traditional values, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so consistently women are often not spoken to about money. They're not included in those conversations.
Mm-hmm.
We talk about trying to get women into STEM for the last 20 years.
Mm-hmm.
STEM includes finance. And
Mm-hmm.
so there's less exposure. And when you're in a room or you're in an environment, even if you're onboarding in HR in your first job and they're talking to you about your 401k and everyone else in there, regardless of your gender, but quite often it's probably mostly men, seem to know what they're doing,
Mm-hmm.
you feel small. And so
Mm-hmm.
you don't want to look stupid. You don't want, there's like an experience of shame or guilt. And so you say nothing.
Mm-hmm.
And that continuous conditioning means that when you get to those life moments, like you highlighted, instead of going in and feeling prepared and confident, you're coming in on a back foot. And so that's what I wanted to overcome. And so when we started to dig into this with people, what I had this aha moment because I've been experimenting with meditation. My partner and I were using Noom to track our calories and to be more
Mm-hmm.
mindful about eating. And all of this just kind of clicked at the same time that so many of the things that we do in our lives require behavior changes, and behavior
Mm.
changes are really hard when you don't get instant gratification. What is less satisfying than putting money in the bank instead of buying something you immediately want? right?
I don't know. I don't know much less satisfying than that.
It's the eating the chocolate cake.
Yeah.
It's it's going out instead of staying in. You can name all the things. Like as
Mm-hmm.
humans, we are wired to want instant gratification.
Mm-hmm.
And yet when we struggle with abstaining, we somehow think it's some sort of personal failure. And it's
Mm-hmm.
just how we're wired. And so when you apply psychology to it, it's pretty simple. If you want to make these, if you want to achieve these long-term goals that are opaque and hard to, to wrap your hands around and to invest in your future self, you have to use some psychology tricks to get yourself to do that. So
Mm-hmm.
the example with nutrition is if you track your calories every day, even if you break your budget with your calories, you'll naturally start making healthier decisions because you're bringing awareness to where you're eating. And it's not saying, Maureen, you can't have the chocolate cake and you have to have the apple.
Mm-hmm.
It's more like you are aware of what you're consuming with each of those. And so if you make a choice, you're making a trade off. And so make a choice and make a choice intentionally instead of making a subconscious decision and then looking back and beating yourself up. That's what I wanted to do with habit. What people kept saying to me was, Jess, I get my, all the other apps I use, all my credit card statements are the same. They tell me I spent too much on Amazon last month. It was $500. I have no idea where that money went. And I said to myself, I shouldn't do that. And then nothing happens again until the end of the month. And so I thought, could I bring this concept of mindfulness to money that would help you in that day to day moment actually apply your value system so you can achieve the goal that you set at the beginning of the month?
Dynamite. It is probably, I'm going to say, more of a common experience today that we have as consumers, especially, have the experience of, whoa, $500 on Amazon. I don't know what I bought. Or I can't, something shows up at the door. I don't remember what I ordered. What is this? So on and so forth, right? If you think about it, the technology is designed for us to give over our money, for it to be very easy for us to instantly gratify, right? I can click, I can swipe, I can tap, I can do this. So like the systems that we're in, that we're existing in, and while it's, pumped up as the benefit of convenience, and granted, it's convenient not to have to go to my debit card, pick it up, punch it in every time I want to buy something. I've actually put that restriction on myself because I've decided, you know what? It is incredibly easy and you actually need to make it a little harder for yourself. that's just,
Maureen,
that's just a hack that works for me. That might work for somebody else.
that's amazing. I mean, what I love that you just said is so often when I talk to people about this, it is again that guilt, that shame. Why can't I stop spending? Why do I order these
Oh,
things from
yeah.
Amazon? And again, it's not like oh, you're addicted to spending, but it's
Mm-hmm.
just, why do I do this?
Mm-hmm.
And if you think about it exactly the way you said, you realize that marketers have been using and this isn't supposed to be, sinister, but
Mm-hmm.
it's smart marketing. You understand how consumers' brains work and you take advantage of that. Humans like instant gratification and we're lazy.
Mm-hmm.
And if you think about, this gets really into the science of it, but we're going to go nerdy for a second, is there's two parts of your brain. There's sort of the animal brain and the
Mm-hmm.
rational brain. The animal brain is our instincts, it is our cravings, it is much more developed than our rational brain. And so this is the brain that usually moves faster. And so, in all of those moments, in those convenience things, when you save your credit card to an app, when you can auto pay, when you can subscribe, anything that makes it easier to give that dopamine hit to the
Mm-hmm.
emotional brain before the rational brain can catch up is what marketers are trying to do.
Love it. Yep. The path of least resistance, right? That's what the animal brain wants. Let me get to it as quickly as we can. And I love that you pointed that out because so often, like you said a few moments ago, the self-blame is so strong. And we forget that number one, this is how our brains work. You are a human being with a brain that was gifted to you by evolution, and it's doing its thing. It's probably doing exactly what it was evolved to do. Now, the thing is, how can we use that brain in a way and what behave and to alter our behavior change so that our brains don't overpower the things that we really need to do and the goals that we really want to achieve in life?
Yeah, I mean, you hit the nail on the head. And when you reframe it like that, you go from a place of feeling like you're out of control and just saying, as an absolute, I am bad with money, or an absolute,
Right.
I'm someone who's not going to be able to deal with this, to going to, hey, my brain is wired this way.
Mm-hmm.
These these marketers are using tools to influence. Why can't I use those same tools to counteract that? Why can't I use these
Mm.
same tips and tricks to achieve my goals? And something as simple as that, and something I talk a lot about is habit, is going from feeling out of control to feeling confident.
Mm-hmm.
That moment right there is taking your power back, because
It
all of a
absolutely
sudden you feel
is.
a sense of choice.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And that's exactly what this podcast is about. This is my project to bring the power back for women, agency, choice, autonomy, right? This is about power and about choice. So the more education we have, the more potentially the choices that we will feel better about for ourselves. As another thing that I say is I don't tell anybody what choices to make, but I let you know what you need to know, hopefully to make the choice, the best choice for you, right? And also getting past that self-blame aspect, because I think the thing is about self-blame and self-flagellation, and then like following that conditioning and kind of that is the disempowerment we're talking about. And so what we're looking for is the empowerment. And so that comes with education, and that's going to come with action. Like you said, it's like, then I start to have confidence. And then the confidence has its own tailwind to it. It has its own momentum. Yes, all of the above. I'm so excited that we're in these waters together. One thing I'd love for you to share, because I think we're kind of getting there, is tell us about the app that you developed and what's it for and how are we supposed to use it and what can it help us do?
Yes, great segue. And
Mm-hmm.
I want to ground it in that concept of control and confidence,
Mm-hmm.
because quite frankly, if you look at the market from an entrepreneurial perspective, building a
Mm-hmm.
financial app would sound crazy, because there's
Mm-hmm.
tons of budgeting apps out
Mm-hmm.
there. You know, Mint's going out of business, so RIP Mint, everyone's kind of looking for
Mm-hmm.
an alternative. But when I looked at the market, what I saw were apps designed for people who already feel confident with their money. So
Mm.
these things just repeated the cycles that were already existing. They tell you at the end of the month what you spent. They encourage you to set a budget that you'll probably break and feel horrible about, and then you'll come back to it. So, not to diss on them, because they're built for a certain type of person. And I
Yes.
think if you're in that place, they're for the people who, when I ask when I do sort of customer research and I ask people to talk to me about how they manage their money, they're the first
Mm-hmm.
people who raise their hands. They're like, Jess, let me show you my spreadsheet. Like, I'm so good
Yeah.
at this. That's great for them. There's
Yes.
a huge gap for everybody else,
The
for the
the
rest.
other 95% of people. Yeah. Uh-huh.
Exactly. And and so if we ground it back in what we had talked about before, was that what we need is to get people out of that cycle of blame and shame and into a place of taking control. And so the entire app experience end to end is built on those principles of psychology we kind of touched on, like giving you giving you a sense of agency, giving you an opportunity to have small wins, all of these different things that help you overcome that emotional, rational brain thing that's happening. And so I think of it as a kind of a journey that starts in stages. And so the first thing that we do, and if you've ever worked with a financial coach, essentially what we are replicating is what a financial coach would take you through. And this is where I love to use the analogy of exercise or nutrition. If you worked with a
Mm-hmm.
coach, this is the same journey they would take you on. The first thing you do is you start building mindfulness around your money. What does that mean? It means every day you take 1 minute and you review where your money has gone.
Mm.
What it looks like in an app is, we text you, again, psychology. No one wants
Mm-hmm.
to download an app and deal with it. We just text you, super easy. And you click on a link and it says it's time for your daily mindfulness. It feels a lot like doing Wordle. And you just
Mm-hmm.
look at your spending, you rate how it makes you feel, and you're done. You don't have to set a budget if you don't want to. You can use our categories or you can make your own.
Mm-hmm.
It's very much like a progress over perfection. So you can engage with it as much or as little as you want. The goal is to just do the habit. Very similarly to the calorie tracking, I don't care if you break your budget. Most people, when they start tracking their spending, break it because they don't know where their money is going. And
Yeah.
so the goal is to just build awareness. And so if you can just start tracking, that's
Mm-hmm.
the goal. It's the same thing as set the goal to get to the gym. Don't set the goal to work out for 60 minutes. Just show up. So what we're
Mm-hmm.
teaching you is to show up for yourself. And that starts building confidence. And then what's happening behind the scenes is you're starting to build that awareness and you're becoming more present in your choices. So
Mm-hmm.
again, you don't need me or anyone else. You said this earlier, like I don't tell people what to do, I empower them. We don't give you financial advice. We're not financial advisors. We do not tell you what you should spend on
Right.
restaurants or coffee or exercise. We believe that everyone has their own value system. And so, what we are trying to do is through helping you build awareness and rating things that make you feel happy and sad and giving that information back to you, empowering you with information so you can start adjusting your choices. So maybe you see that the example I used for myself when I started going through this is I had a lot of takeout and meals out as both happy and sad. And when I dug into it, when I reflected on it, what I noticed was my sad faces were when I was being lazy and I got takeout because I didn't meal prep or because I was getting coffee because I just wanted to get out of the house. The things I rated happy were when I was eating, sharing food with a loved one, a friend, my fiance, my family. And I started kind of identifying, okay, Jessica, value system is really the food is about bringing people together. And so this stuff we're going to invest in and we're going to feel good about that. The things over here that were more about convenience or, like actually trying to satisfy an underlying need, like the coffee wasn't about the coffee was about getting out of my house in the morning. What do I want to do differently there? And so that was kind of my own personal journey. Everyone goes through their own. But what happens is when people start identifying their values, they go from a place of just spending money arbitrarily to looking at what they're spending on and making a conscious choice about it. And that daily choice is what gets people to that goal at the end of the month of finally living with them in their means, finally saving, finally going from I just spent $500 at Amazon to being someone. I can't tell you how many users text me this in their first month and they go, Jess, this is the first time I've gotten my credit card statement and it didn't stress me out because I already knew it was on it. Like
There you
how great is
go.
that?
Yep. The systems make it very easy for us to get on autopilot. And I think what your app does is and that's also what mindfulness does, is it gets us out of the autopilot because there's some type of discomfort happening with the autopilot where we're like, wait a second. So the app allows you the chance to take stock and take account of how you're feeling about the spending. And I love what you shared about drilling down into your spending about eating out, because you picked up, like I often say, I will never tell a single mother who works a job or two or three and has two kids at home, you shouldn't do any more DoorDash. You have to give it up completely, especially if she's exhausted, she's stressed, and she loves her family, and her family, she deeply values them and she wants them to be happy. And that's how she does it. That's the thing. Like I'm not going to take that away from somebody, but we will dig into, hey, let's also talk about the other things that are going on with the spending, right? So you tapped into some really important things there, especially the value-driven spending. When we take the time to literally take the time to tune in to our spending decisions and how we feel about them, we are better aligning ourselves with our values and we feel better about our spending. Then we know where our money is going with the spending. Then when we get the bill, we're like, oh yeah, no surprises here. I'm not stressed out. One other thing I want to point out is I practiced meditation. I still practice it, but not as intensely as I used to, but practiced in Buddhist circles. And one of the styles of Buddhist meditation is mindfulness meditation. So And in what mindfulness does, that specific type of meditation, it leads to awareness. You brought up that the daily mindfulness of the app leads to awareness. And then what happens in meditation is the awareness leads to insight. That's when things kind of come together, or a light bulb goes off and you're like, oh, that's happening. I'm doing that. That's how this is working. That's what I'm really emotional about, or something like that. So the insight is this gem of information, this download that you can get. And then the insight allows you to make changes, meaningful changes. So it's really interesting how you explained the process of what the app does. And I'm thinking about what I've learned about insight and mindfulness meditation in Buddhism, because it seems to track that path.
I just had this idea that I need to start marketing this as budgeting for Buddhists, because
Yeah.
it's totally aligned. But I
Yeah.
also want to just pause and like kind of give a shout out, or like a playback of something that you do that I think is so powerful, because we keep, the whole point of this is to empower women, is to give people their power. And the point you made earlier about the single mom, getting DoorDash, and you're never going to tell her this is what you should do.
Right.
There is the whole point of this, and this is where I think habit really mirrors coaching more so than, I would say, dictation that I think some other experiences give you, is no one likes being told what to do, because it presumes that you know more than that person. And at our deepest
Absolutely.
human level, we want to feel heard and we want to feel understood. And people are much more likely to take action when they choose their own path. And so by reflecting back to the person you're working with and saying, this is your reality, what do you want to choose? The options they can come up with are probably different than the ones that you could come up with. So like, who are we to say what you should do? Like, I just want to kill the should from this. Like, how often do you get asked, what do I should do? And you're like, no, I'm not going to tell you, but I'm going to help you figure it out. Like, that is so powerful. And that is that moment where all of a sudden people take control, when you make a choice of what you are going to do.
Yeah. Yeah. It's funny because you just like packaged up everything that makes me a true coaching nerd. Cause I'm just like, I want to be with people in the space where it is uncomfortable. Believe it or not, I'm okay with that, because I know that that is the recipe for some magic and some empowerment to happen. It's like, what should I do? Or it's tell me what to do. And of course, we all want someone to tell us what to do, tell us what decision to make. And that's just not how life works, right? I mean, we have to make our own decisions. And what I love so much about coaching is when I'm with a client and we're in that space together, they find their own solutions. And like you said, the ideas that they come up with to solve their problems are immensely more creative and potent than anything I can come up with. I mean, I can do some educating, some education. I can tell them some information about how things work, but they get to really decide. And you're right. It's magical when I get to choose something that resonates deeply with me about a change I'm going to make, or something that I want to do it because of, this is my why. This is my reason why.
Yes.
That's what gets people invested in behavior change. And I also tell people, especially teaching those, financial classes and having financial discussions over the years, is behavior change is the hardest thing we do as humans. It's not just with money. It's not just with diet. I kind of hate that we all go back to the diet part, but I mean, I do, it's like, but behavior change is one of the most challenging enterprises that we enter in on as humans, period, because we have these magnificent brains with their conditioning and their wiring and we have this amazing nervous system that's all talking to each other. So sometimes we have to hack into these systems to help ourselves get to that place of change.
Well, and the other thing about that, and you said this, that where you kind of lean in, is you help people when they're in that vulnerable state. And I feel like at its core, that is why behavior change is so hard, because it is it is uncomfortable to be uncomfortable. And
Yep.
it is, that is where that short-term, long-term mindset comes in, and where
Mhm.
you're sort of fighting the two sides of your brain.
Mhm.
And I think it's important to kind of highlight this, because I imagine for your listeners, there's probably some people out there who've listened to you, and Maureen is, just Bible. And there's
Right.
probably some people out there who are listening who are fearful and haven't felt, the ability to take that
Mhm.
first step. And
Mhm.
I always like to speak to that person to sort of say, it's okay to ask for help. You don't have
Yes.
to do this alone. And when
Mhm.
you're learning to do something new, it's
Mhm.
it's okay to ask for help.
Mhm.
That's
Mhm.
why coaches exist. That's again why some people, I love the mindfulness thing, because sometimes I think we all talk, there's enough diet talk in women's
Oh, of
culture.
course. Yeah, I
Um,
know.
but the mindfulness I really like, because it's about, why do people practice meditation? It's about being present. And at
Mhm.
the end of the day, that's what we're trying to do. Is when you are present in your life and you're present in every decision, it is much more likely that you're making those decisions in alignment with your values. But that's very counter to how our brain works. And so it takes training. It is like building a
Practice.
muscle.
Mhm.
And so having the personal trainer, or having that sidekick, or, even the accountability buddy to show up,
Mhm.
whatever you need to
Mhm.
get there. And there should be no shame in asking for help. And it does not mean that is some sort of reflection on you and your abilities.
Mhm.
It's something you can learn. It's not who you are inherently.
Exactly. No one comes out of the womb good at managing their money. No one comes out of the womb the perfect budgeter. It just doesn't
No,
happen.
we're cavemen. If people
Yeah.
were good at abstaining from instant gratification, they would have been weeded out by evolution. You're telling me if you were a cave woman and you walked up to a fig tree and you said to yourself, well, I'll have 5 of those, but then I'm going to save it for later. You know what happened? You die, because everyone else would have eaten the rest of the things on the fig tree. Like, this
Yes.
is survival.
Yeah. Yes. So we're carrying all this evolution with us into this space, this contemporary space of these systems that are asking for our money all the time. And I love to talk about these things because for me, it debunks the shame. It dismantles the shame. I have extra information to consider in my assumptions. And I'm like, oh, maybe I'm not so terrible after all. You know what I mean? Like maybe I'm not a total hot mess with money after all. And I think when we can help people get there, there's a sense of relief. And then there's like, all right, I can do this. You got to like offload some of that shame and self-blame. And I also think that our culture is really good about shaming and blaming, especially when it comes to money too, rather than uplifting. The next question I want to ask you is, what is it like being a woman fintech founder? Tell us more about that.
Ooh. Well, I would say, if I just think about first the woman founder piece, I think what's very interesting is the second you kind of get to quote unquote Silicon Valley,
Mm-hmm.
this instantly becomes a part of the conversation you're having, is that there
Mm-hmm.
aren't enough female founders, there aren't enough female investors, there aren't enough investors investing in female founders, women get
Right.
less money. When
Yeah.
I worked at Stitch Fix, the big story we would talk about was Katrina Lake, who was our founder, had a hard time raising money because
Mm-hmm.
of what she was doing, and how she would go to meetings with her COO, who was a man, and everyone would assume that he was in charge and not her.
Mm-hmm.
And so this is just kind of constantly a part of the conversation. And I think it's good, but it also means you are painfully aware that you are rare. And, I think on top of it, I'll be very honest, when I first started, and I don't think this insecurity has gone away, is I'm building this for people like me. Inherently, I don't like dealing with money. I don't like finance. It is
Mm-hmm.
something I've always wanted to avoid. I'm actually very good at math and I enjoy it. So there's a bit of a disconnect there, but it's
Mm-hmm.
something I always told myself I wasn't good at. And so I want to move as far away from it as possible. So the fact that I've landed here is just hilarious because it's so not what I was interested in. But that also, I will admit, adds a level of insecurity because I look around and I think
Mm-hmm.
all these boys totally know what they're doing. But what I sort of my mantra and what I have to come back to every day is that, well, if everyone else looks the same, that's probably why they've been building the same thing. And maybe my superpower is that I can better empathize with the people who have been underserved because I understand them, not just because I'm a woman, but because of all of the different dimensions of who I am as a person. The fact that I grew up with humble means, the fact that I watched my mom, consistently not get to live her purpose and her, what she wanted to do with her life because no one ever had the money talk with her. No one ever
Mm-hmm.
empowered her, which meant a lot of her life is spent based or dictated by the choices of her partner because she's been
Mm-hmm.
reliant on them. And that all of this kind of tied together, I think, has brought me to the place where I am. And all of those stories, good, bad, or different, is just me. And what I hope is that habit is a reflection of that, and that it is something that the different is a good different.
So well said. Just the idea, I know what it's like to look around. I mean, I think every adult woman who grew up as a girl knows what it's like to look around in math class, in algebra class, in calculus class, in finance class, in economics class, and see the boys' hands go up confidently and say, they just really know it. I don't.
Mm-hmm.
That was my experience. I mean, I was just like, they're just really good at it, and what, so that it's because they are conditioned. There's more of a focus, a generous focus, I think, on young boys than on young girls, like you mentioned in the STEM fields. And then that leads to us adult women being like, well, looking around like,
Should I be
doubting,
here?
exactly, doubting ourselves. So much, so relatable, I think. And so this is what gets me really excited. So relatable and so changeable. This can be
Yes.
changed. This can be changed. And it is never too late to build your confidence in anything. And I think that, part of the gift of where our cultural conversations are now is a lot of people are with their activism, making sure that, and my podcast is my version of activism, and your app is your business is your version of activism, right? So many people are bringing their activism out to the world to say, this is changeable. We can change this. And we want to talk to young girls and make sure that they know that they're good with money. They know that they're good with math. So that they become the adults. And it's like, they're looking around and their hands are up. They're getting
Yes.
just as much funding. There isn't this, I'm the anomaly in the room.
But isn't it, if we think about it at a meta level, what you just said is it's like as a society, we're at the awareness phase.
Mm-hmm.
As exhausting as it is to be constantly reminded that you're one of the few,
Right.
it is better than
Mm-hmm.
not being aware.
Mm-hmm.
And so, I think it's like a society, if we think of the evolution of mindfulness in what you shared earlier about the arc that you created was so beautiful,
Mm-hmm.
is that you go from that awareness to that insight.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like the question is, what is the next step? What is the next generation doing to
That's
get to
right.
that insight? But the awareness is the first step.
Mm-hmm.
And the the beautiful thing about this is, one, that it can change, but two, it can start with you. You know,
Right.
I there's a trend that actually my dad sent me. I didn't know he was on TikTok, but he's on TikTok and he sent me a trend today that's called loud budgeting.
It's
which
so
is,
funny because I was just thinking of
did you
loud
just see
budget
it?
because well, I've seen like headlines about it lately. I haven't like looked at any of the social media about it, but it's funny because I think it's so timely that you and I are taping this. We're taping this in January of 2024, and it's just when this loud budgeting thing is coming on. And like you and I are talking about essentially money management and cash flow management, but share what your dad sent you.
Well, what I was excited about and where I was going with this is a lot of the times we feel out of control with money, and that's when we feel helpless. And that's probably
Mm-hmm.
with anything in life. If
Yeah.
you feel out of control of anything.
Mm-hmm.
And right now, again, January 2024, inflation, things are expensive, housing is expensive. There was an article that came out today that was something like 60% of adults between certain ages are living at home or being funded by their parents.
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot of money stress out there,
Yeah.
and it can feel really disempowering to be told, well, you should just manage your money better. And so that is very disempowering. But what I love when I saw this loud budgeting thing, and to just explain what loud budgeting is in air quotes, it's this idea of vocalizing what you are willing to spend your money on. And
Mm-hmm.
to me, what I hear is you're vocalizing your values. So what it looks like is if a friend invites you out to dinner saying, hey, I would prefer to go for a walk, or, could you have dinner over at my house? I can cook for you because I don't want to spend money on this because I want to do something else with it. And when I saw this, I was so excited because one, that's literally what we're trying to teach you with habit. But two, what that is a reflection of a trend of people taking ownership. So
Yep.
saying, hey, I can't control inflation. I can't
Mm-hmm.
control the situation I'm in, but I can make a choice to improve my situation. I will play the cards I'm dealt instead of walking away from the table.
Mm-hmm. And it's also showing that people are increasingly more willing, I think, to have discussions that, of course, are awkward and uncomfortable. Like, your friends go out for happy hour or they go out to dinner every Saturday or something like that. And that's just the thing that you and your friends do. It's hard to tell them, hey, I can't do this anymore. Are you really telling them you don't want to do this anymore, that you don't value their time and their companionship? And that's not what you're telling them at all. So it takes a lot of emotional work to like separate out, I really value my time with you and I want to spend time with you. Right now, I need to find a different way for us to spend time together that's helping me meet my financial goals. Like,
Yeah.
we
Yeah.
don't hear that in the cultural conversation, but now we do with loud budgeting. So I'm
Well,
very
and
excited.
what you just said made me think, when I think about habit, I think one of the hardest things I have to overcome, and I would imagine that you might as well in a coaching practice, is someone who feels that shame and that guilt often feels alone. And so that first step of sort of raising your hand is the hardest thing. Like my hardest
Mm-hmm.
thing is getting to that person and saying, like, finding that person who doesn't feel heard and saying, I hear you, I can help you.
Mm-hmm.
And when I've thought about it, to me, what habit's mission is trying to change that conversation around money. I compare it a
Mm-hmm.
lot to therapy. 10 years ago, therapy was that, my dad does this. Therapy sounds good for other people, but
Yeah.
do you need therapy? I don't need
Yeah. Yeah.
therapy.
Well, I don't need it.
Yeah, it was sort of this otherized thing that other people did. And I
Yeah.
think the pandemic really accelerated the social acceptance of therapy to the point
Yes.
that therapy's on my calendar. I start sentences regularly with my therapist said.
Yeah,
It
I
is a
talked it
very
out with my therapist. Yeah, I
yes, it is
start comments like that.
it's part of the cultural conversation, and it's accepted. And the point you just made about talking about money
Mm-hmm.
is really hard. It is very taboo in our culture to talk about money and what you can and can't afford and what you do make and you don't make.
Mm-hmm.
And it is, because it's taboo, it makes a lot of this living your values really hard. But I have to say, it's really freeing. I started doing it with habit when, I quit my not so cushy, but paying startup job to work at Habit. And I was living off of my savings, or I'm making very little and I'm working side hustles. And so
Mm-hmm.
I drastically had to adjust my life, and that was my choice. And I started saying that to people. And it was funny because the concept of saying I can't afford felt
Mm,
weird, and that's always the taboo thing. But I changed the message to be I'm choosing not to afford. And doesn't that
exactly.
sound a little different?
Yeah, and I think it hits different. It lands different internally. It's like we can I can't afford, I can't afford, I can't. I mean, it is a factual statement, but there's a tone, there's like a feeling, a charge to it that is really disempowering. And rather than, I'm choosing something different right now.
Yeah.
Different gets you in a different mind space, gets you in a different heart space, I think. Absolutely. The last question that I want to ask you, Jess, is what is the one question I was supposed to ask you today that you want, or the last thing that you want our audience to know that I didn't ask you in one of these questions?
Oh, yeah. I would say what I would want to be asked so I could answer is what what do you say to, what do you say to the person who's kind of in that moment of self-doubt or is in that spiral we talked about? Like, what is the thing that you can do to get out of that? And the thing that I really like to say, and I think is a big piece of the habit experience, is it's progress over perfection. Doing something is better than nothing.
That's right.
Taking a step is better than inertia. And I actually see it a lot in the habit experience. I call these users boomerangs, where they get on the horse for a month or two and they're really diligent. And then life happens. Someone gets laid off, someone has to go to the
Mhm.
hospital. A lot of pets got sick this year. Life
Yeah.
happens.
Yeah.
And life happens, and that's the richness of life. And sometimes you fall off the wagon, but I can't tell you how many people have fallen off and come back.
Mm-hmm.
And it's, what's that old saying, like fall off the horse 9 times, it's about getting up the 10th.
Get back up.
Like,
Yep.
I'm not going to tell you that behavioral change is easy, but I am going to tell you that it's worth it. And I'm going to tell you that it's messy and that it's okay to be messy. When people sit down and they think, oh, I broke a budget, it's like, unless you lived every day, every week, every month, every year
Mm.
exactly the same, you're
Yeah.
never going to follow a budget. A budget is
Right.
meant to be, what is that Pirates of the Caribbean reference? These
Mm-hmm.
aren't rules, they're guidelines. Like,
Yeah.
it's a guideline.
That's
It is,
right.
it is
Yeah.
not a requirement. And,
Mm-hmm.
and this, this, I talked to an advisor when I was first starting to build habit, and I said, what would you advise me to do from a philosophy perspective? And I have it on a sticky note on the wall of my office. And it says, empower yourself to say, how do you create an experience where everyone can make progress in some way? Like, winning is
Love it.
any version of progress.
That's right.
There's no one path to follow. And
Mm-hmm.
it just hits so deeply because we're
Mm-hmm.
all coming, from a different perspective. And I'm not going to sit
Mm-hmm.
here and give you a path to go down. And
Mm-hmm.
as a coach, you aren't either.
Mm-hmm.
But the end goal, it's what is that shoots and ladders game, is like, it doesn't
Mm-hmm.
really matter like the path you go down as long as you get to the end goal.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's that, like, progress over perfection perfectly
Yeah.
encapsulated. Like, if I, if you're someone who's sitting there going, go, what's my New Year's resolution or whatever, just ask yourself, what's the one thing I could do this week to
That's
make my
all.
life
Yep.
better?
Mm-hmm.
What's one thing?
Mm-hmm. I love it. Perfection is not required. It's not a requirement. And did you hear that, everyone? Progress over perfection. That's our new mantra for 2024. So, Jess Baier, how can people find you? How can people find the Habit Money app? Tell us where to find you.
Yes, well, it's perfect timing. It's again January 2024, and we've been going through a big redesign, a big product build, and so we're kind of officially relaunching in the next couple of weeks. So you can find us at habitmoney.com. It's going to redirect you to yourfinancialhabit.com because that's part of the change. You can also find us on TikTok and Instagram at Join Habit Money, where I talk a lot about this mindfulness journey for myself, the founder journey, trying to break some of these stereotypes about money. So I would encourage you to follow along, and I would love to see you in the Habit app somewhere.
Oh, that's so the habit sphere. We're building a new universe here. This is great. So I will make sure that all those details go into the show notes, the episode notes. And I am just, it's funny because we talked about it at the top of this talk. I said I can guarantee I'm going to come out of this conversation energized, and here I am, super duper energized and really excited for everything that you're doing with not just with your business, but with the app and the type of changes that you're really helping people make, which are so meaningful and so helpful. So thank you for doing what you do. Thank you for being on the show.
Well, I mean, back at you, Maureen, you asked me what it's like to be a female founder. And the thing that I didn't say was that this experience in my career has been the most rewarding because I get to meet, like, people are just, the generosity of spirit that I have experienced has been incredible. And I think part of it is when you are doing something that is mission driven, you naturally connect with people who are trying to go down the same path. And, like you said, that at the top of this call, we'll get energized. I cannot tell you how just inspired I am at the end of this conversation when when you meet people who are trying to do the same thing. It's that energy investment that you need at the
Mhm.
end of a Friday when you're going to be working on product all weekend.
Mhm. Mhm.
And it's the fuel that keeps me going. So thank you for creating this platform. Thank you for doing the work that you do. Thank you for having me on, and thank you for giving Habit, an opportunity to hopefully reach some people who need it.
Awesome. You are so welcome. It is my pleasure. I'm rooting for you, and I think all of our listeners are too. I just want to give my final sign off to listeners. As always, with your finances, be kind to yourself, seek support with when you need it, and let me know how it goes. Thank you so much. We'll see you on the next episode.